I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics. I Am Stan, a graphic biography of the legendary Stan Lee. Fantastic four-grand design, now back in print. Godzilla's Monsterpiece Theater, which will be out in a trade paperback in July. I'm also the author of Space Opera Xanadax, Across the Unknown Dimensions of the Galaxy, a new original graphic novel from Image Comics that's in stores in August.
I'm Matt Zeoli.
I thought we could talk about dungeon crawls. I've had like the dungeon crawl genre on my mind, which anybody who's not familiar, it's sort of like the basic like Dungeons and Dragons setup where like you're in some kind of dungeon, some kind of cave or whatever, and you're working your way through and you're fighting monsters and gathering treasure and stuff. They talk about rogue or rogue-like games where it's like, it's not necessarily this, but where you have like a randomly generated dungeon. You kind of go from like room to room. Each time it's a different adventure, or even like the underworld in The Legend of Zelda, or the Mines of Moria. And early computer games, you'd have Rogue, you'd have Hack, and then you'd have Moria. And they were all supposed to be like the Mines of Moria, that like section of Lord of the Rings story, where it's like, we're in this, underground world and it's filled with dangers and treasures.
Two of the best words ever are dungeon crawl.
Yeah.
And a recent game you showed me was Dark Chambers for the Atari.
It's so much fun. When I first started playing it, I felt like the pace of it was kind of lethargic. But now I love it. It's like a stroll. You're strolling through this dungeon, and it just it feels very expansive for an Atari 2600 game. And since then, and it's it's kind of like a Gauntlet clone. It's kind of there. I guess there's a lot to the story. It's like this guy created a game called Dandy, kind of like D and D, but Dandy, and it was an action adventure dungeon crawl for the computer. And then Atari took that and made Gauntlet, but I guess like didn't credit the guy, didn't pay him, maybe they like adapted it or they copied it or whatever you want to say. And then I guess there was like I don't know, like a lawsuit or I don't know the exact ins and outs, but they came to some kind of arrangement with this guy and they agreed that they would make Dark Chambers. They would make an adaptation of Dandy and give them whatever, compensate them in whatever way. So Dark Chambers was, like an official adaptation of Dandy.
The game plays beautifully and it's just the right amount of difficulty.
Mm-hmm. It gets hard as you get deeper into that dungeon. Like I still haven't beaten it.
Tom, my hands were sweating when we were playing it. And I couldn't believe, I was like, the Atari... They have the little pixel creatures.
Yeah.
They were causing me fright just seeing the little
the low fidelity of it is a little scary because you have these like sort of Grim Reaper like ghost kind of characters and stuff. And I'd always wanted to play this Atari 7800 version, and I'd never played it before. But recently I got to play it. Like I got this it was this like handheld Atari Evercade. One of the things on it was the 7800 version of Dark Chamber. So I got to like play the hell out of that. I loved it. It was a lot of fun. It's graphically more like complicated and intricate. It's, and I did for a little while, I did like it better than the 2600 version, but then it is much more beatable than the 2600 version. I kind of like, once I'd seen everything that it had to offer, I kind of went back to the 2600 version. Like the 2600 version has a little something magical to it
about
that like
it.
This more technologically advanced one just didn't have it.
I was just blown away about how good it was.
Yeah, like they've brought back the Atari. There's this new company that I guess bought the name or bought bought the company, and so they're doing a sort of Atari resurgence, and they're reissuing a lot of cartridges. Especially ones that are like a little harder to find, like Dark Chambers. So they're reissuing the 7800 Dark Chambers cartridge. So I'm thinking about maybe picking that up.
Wow. I never had the Atari.
Yeah.
But for my NES, I had Gauntlet.
Gauntlet, yeah.
We had that, and that
Yeah, it's almost a 1-to-1,
for
Gauntlet to Dark Chambers.
And we had we rented this game called Swords and Serpents. Would that
Oh,
be...
yes. Yeah, that is kind of like a classic RPG because Gauntlet and Dark Chambers and Zelda and stuff, the combat is decided through, just arcade elements where you're just like, you basically have to fight in real time, and if you're quick enough and smart enough, you defeat it. Where Swords and Serpents was like a classic RPG where your character has certain attributes, you're working your way through this dungeon, and then when the fight happens, it's determined by your statistics versus the opponent's statistics. So that's kind of like the classic one.
We had poster that I think other games came with a dark Swords and Serpents poster.
Okay.
So I had like 2 of like posters for a game I didn't even own.
I liked Swords and Serpents a lot, and like I had kind of forgotten about it, and I want to go back and revisit it.
And we rented one of the games we rented them a ton from Farmore was Solstice.
Oh, I love Solstice. Yeah.
Would that be more? Is that a dungeon crawler, or like what? How would you?
Well, yeah. I mean, the dungeon crawl genre is kind of it's kind of expansive. It's open to interpretation and can be discussed. That I feel like that belongs to its own subgenre, but you are working your way through this kind of dungeon, and it does have like a fantasy setting. You're like this little wizard.
A lot of puzzles.
I played Solstice for the first time at the Nintendo World Championship. It wasn't available yet. It was like there were certain games there where you're getting a preview. What's it called? Castlevania 3 was one of them, and Castlevania 3 it was kind of in the beta stage. So I was playing like a not quite ready for prime time version of Castlevania 3. Which was a lot of fun. But Solstice was one of them, and I had so much fun with that. But Solstice is like there's this subgenre of sort of isometric platformers that and it was really popular in Europe, this subgenre. There'd be a bunch of them. And Solstice might even be like originally like a European computer game or the ZX Spectrum or whatever. They'd have these ones, and it would be like that would be this isometric view, and you're sort of jumping and solving puzzles and stuff. But I'd say that's more of like a puzzle based isometric platform.
And when I rented it, I would bring it into lunch. I had it at the lunch table in elementary school. It was getting like Hunt's snack pack and stuff and like chips. I rented Wizards and Warriors. Would that be more platformer or like?
Yeah, but I mean,
I love it.
There are, and in more recent years, there have been sort of side-scrolling hacks or a side-scrolling roguelike games, and maybe that fits in like the sort of video evolution of like video games and stuff. It felt like there were way more like spaceship shooting at stuff. There were way more future games and way fewer sort of like fantasy games. So I was always excited about any kind of fantasy game.
Me too.
That came down the pike.
We rented Wizards and Warriors, but I own one of the first games for our NES was Iron Sword.
The sequel,
The sequel to that. And I remember my parents didn't mean it, but like when I was playing Iron Sword, there was like a news broadcast, like a feature on Mario 3, and it was like we were riveted by it, and my parents said that like I was like, can I get they got me Mario 3 eventually.
Yeah, but you had just gotten Iron Sword.
They said you have to beat one of your games first, which I did.
That's fair. That seems fair.
But I didn't.
I played the hell out of Wizards and Warriors, and it was also there was the Wizards and Warriors TV show that I loved, and then it went away real fast. And then when this Wizards and Warriors game came out, I'm like, is this connected to is this related to that? Is that I think it's just like a coincidence or whatever, but I don't think it's directly related. But yeah, I never played Iron Sword, strangely enough. I played the hell out of Wizards and Warriors, but Iron Sword I never really got my hands on.
We rented Wizards and Warriors, but I owned I remember, I think I have it on VHS, which I digitized. It's my birthday, and I'm receiving the Wizards and Warriors handheld game.
Oh, for the Game Boy? Or no, I know the one you're talking about, but like Jalico or whatever.
Yeah, and I'm like excited I'm like just as excited getting that as getting my Batman.
Yeah, I love those games, and they like reissue those games every now and then. There's like an X-Men one recently and a Power Rangers one. So yeah, I like those too.
But I just discovered There's a sequel to Solstice for
Okay.
the Super NES called Equinox.
Equinox, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
That's like blew my mind. I'm gonna like play that a little bit.
I'm always like in the mood to play like a dungeon crawl, and so Dark Chambers was one. Legend of Zelda. Like I have the little Zelda handheld, the little Game Watch. I defeated the first quest, and now I have it like on the second quest, which is the difficulty goes way up on the second quest, but it is kind of fun, working your way through these little dungeons. I'm always looking for like board game versions. There's Hero Quest.
Oh, we love Hero Quest.
Unfortunately, it's like you can't play solo Hero Quest.
No.
Like you need to get some people together to play Hero Quest. And there's like a couple of these like Dungeons and Dragons ones, like we've talked about them, like
with like the
like Ravenloft and stuff. Yeah, where it's like
Ravenloft.
Puzzle pieces and you kind of expand. So I like those. And there's usually like a solo mode for those too. On one of our episodes, we were playing Tiny Epic Battles.
Oh, I love that game.
And that has sort of like a dungeon crawl solo version. I played that. That was kind of fun. And then somebody in the comments recommended Tiny Epic Dungeons, which I got and I played and is really great.
Whoa.
It's like you lay out the cards of the dungeon as you're like walking your way through it, and you're fighting all these monsters, and your torch keeps getting dimmer. It keeps running out. That's like it's kind of nerve-wracking how fast your torch runs out, but it gives the game a momentum. I like that a lot. So I'm always trying new stuff. I got a couple other games to try out, but like somebody had come up with this game called Scoundrel. So I looked up the rules for it, and it's basically a single player rogue-like dungeon crawl that uses a regular deck of cards. So I bought a regular deck of cards, and then I had it with me, and I'm like, okay, let me give this a try. And it's addictive. I'm like completely addicted to it.
You gotta show me how to play.
Yeah, I'll show you. It is so much fun because it's like it's the clubs and the spades are the monsters in the dungeon, and then the diamonds are your weapons that you find.
Are you kidding me?
And then the hearts. Can you guess what the hearts are?
Power-ups.
Well, they're like health potions. So you have your hit points. So you have like a little stack of cards. You have a stack of 10 cards, which represents your hit points. You have 20 hit points. Each card represents 2 hit points. The rest of the deck is your dungeon. And so you deal out 4 cards, and that's like a room of the dungeon. And then you can either deal with all the stuff that's in that room, or you can run away. And it's just super cool. So much, it's very addictive, so much fun. And like I realized playing it, like, I mean, I haven't played like a regular game of solitaire in a million years. Like I kind of don't care about that. But it's like just by saying, oh, this is a dungeon crawl, and making it's like
it's a beautiful. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, but it's funny because it's not like the card. It's not like a special deck, or it's not like you lay down a card and it's like a spider or a troll or something. It is like you're laying down, the 8 of clubs or something. But it made me realize just like the metaphor of a dungeon crawl, for whatever reason,
it's so good, Tom.
It's got its hooks in me, and it did get me thinking like I could be playing solitaire, but solitaire doesn't have a cool metaphor. Like maybe somebody out there has like a cool metaphor for what solitaire is. Yeah. But by having this game be like an actual dungeon crawl with rooms and weapons and monsters and power-ups and stuff, it's like I was just kind of wondering like why is that? What is it about this sort of dungeon crawl genre that has me like under its thrall?
It's so good. It's the atmosphere.
Yeah. You know what? The satanic panic, they would say, oh, well, it's Satan. Satan. Of course it has its claws in you because it's a satanic idea. You're roaming the halls of hell.
That's funny
fighting demons.
That you mentioned that. The other movie I was going to play was Mazes and Monsters.
Yeah, Tom Hanks. I wonder if he gets like how people get like asked about these like ironic kind of movies or projects that they had completely forgotten about but sort of have take on a life of their own. I wonder if like he gets asked about Mazes and Monsters like more than any other project.
Hey, are you that guy from Mazes and Monsters?
Are you that guy that went insane because he played role-playing games and took them too seriously?
He refuses to let Colin Hanks and his son Chet Hayes play D&D. He's like, you're not playing the devil's game.
The thing I was thinking about it is that like what's appealing about the metaphor of the dungeon crawl is you're kind of like you're going into this underground world, and it is kind of, I mean, when you think about like Jung and Freud and stuff, you're going, it's kind of like you're going into your own sort of unconscious mind or whatever, or subconscious or whatever. You're going, or maybe even into the collective unconscious. And in that sort of dream state or whatever, that this like hidden world that's somewhere in all of our psyches, it's all like the demons and things that have ever like sort of plagued our, you know, all the dark little bits that are part of like the human collective unconscious. And then there's also like all these wonderful, like hidden within all that muck are all these sort of treasures and wonderful things and beautiful things. But you also have to sort of do battle with these sort of darker internal, these kind of like internal, I don't know, these you know, creatures that are sort of remnants of like an earlier version of humanity. They're like it's sort of like cavemen and trolls and monsters. They're kind of like you know, the reptile brain. They're like, you know, aspects of like the human animal that, you know, as it was in the distant past at a time when it needed to be like a little more, you know, brutal or whatever. You know, I don't know. It got me thinking.
It's so beautiful, Tom. Like the first dungeon crawl that I was vibing on was in the Masters of the Universe book, when they had to go under, like they chased, I think, Trapjaw into the catacombs beneath Castle Grayskull.
Yeah, I mean, Castle Grayskull is completely like this Jungian, I don't know, landscape or whatever, and it is like the thing that always was like compelling and puzzling to me was that it was Castle Grayskull was like the good guys' headquarters, and it was like, wait, how's that work? You know, it obviously should be Skeletor's lair, but it's not. It's, you know, and so that created like an interesting mystery. And so you did have, you know, had computers and stuff. You had a throne room, all this, and then you had all the high technology up. But then you had this like pit. of Lovecraftian monsters at the bottom,
trying to get out of it.
Yeah, so I feel like those Lovecraftian monsters that are trying to crawl their way out of a cage is sort of like these, you know, the shadow self or whatever. These sort of you know, parts of our of human nature that we'd rather not acknowledge.
Thinking about this stuff,
it seems to go hand in hand. Like they play around with this genre and they try like, okay, maybe it's like you're trapped in a shopping mall or like you're on a space station or something. But it does feel for some reason like that sort of, you know, Tolkien, you know, kind of world sort of fits perfectly. I was thinking like playing this one that you play with a deck of playing cards, it did make me think that even playing cards themselves have this sort of old-timey thing. You know, I mean, it's obviously it's like kings and queens and jacks and stuff, but just the drawing is very, it's like of a different era, you know?
Yeah, like you go down to the dungeon, who lit those torches? Like, what's behind that cage? Mm-hmm. You go around a corner, you might see a mummy or something, or a skeleton with a sword. It's like, it just makes me so happy.
Mm-hmm. I have been playing with the idea of like creating my own dungeon crawl like card game or something, because I've played a bunch of them and I haven't found one that like does exactly what I'm looking for. Like I've that Scoundrel is very fun and very addictive and very simple, but it's like maybe too simple. And then there's other ones that are like maybe a little too involved. Like I want one that's somewhere in between, something that's like, you know, kind of complicated, but like all you need is the deck. You know, all you need is the deck, and you can.
And you have cool artwork on it.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm kind of in the process of
trying
to figure that. You know, trying to fill a void. Like if there's something you're looking for that you can't quite find, then it's like, okay, maybe it's your job to make it.
We gotta play test that.
Yeah. Zork. We talked about Zork in another episode. That's, you know.
I was just reading Zork today after when we were talking about the episode. I was reading the transcript of Zork from MIT.
That is fun. Again, like when you mentioned Solstice, that was interesting because that wasn't one that I would have thought of, but it is interesting because like a dungeon crawl, it's kind of like there's fighting to some, there's some degree of fighting in it. isn't always, but like the best ones have some degree of puzzle solving. There's some kind of puzzle you gotta solve. But it's kind of like Solstice, it's like all puzzle solving, no fighting.
Yeah.
So it's like it's the balance isn't enough for you to say, okay, this is solidly a dungeon.
But the way the character's designed and the look, you'd think there'd be more monsters than there are.
Yeah. I do like a randomized dungeon crawl, because that is like Rogue and Hack and the Moria. Those were all sort of so then you could in theory you could play it forever. You could like every time you play it's a different game, which is kind of how that Scoundrel game is. I've only beaten it once. I've played it a bunch of times, only beaten it once. But just like Rogue and stuff, it is kind of, you just sort of see how far you can get into that dungeon. You're not really expected to win it, although some of them do have sort of a winning condition. And this Scoundrel does have a winning condition, which I've met once. I've come close a couple times. I remember when I first saw Rogue, because originally it was just kind of like shareware or something. It was just open source. It was made for like networks and mainframes and stuff, and anybody who had it could play it. But eventually they made like a commercial version you could buy in stores, and it was put out by Epix. And the box art was so cool. It was like this, all of Epic's box art was this kind of design where it's sort of like glowing line art in different colors. And so it was like this, sort of like this questing, warrior or something, grabbing this like crystal off of a wall, and it's all drawn, and it just looked like so much fun. And then I'd look at the back, and the graphics weren't anything great. And in fact, the original version of Rogue was just ASCII symbols. It was just like, the rooms were made out of periods. The walls were made out of, hashtag symbol, the number symbols. And then your character, I think, was the @ symbol and stuff.
Wow.
Then this like commercially available version, it was like a tiny bit more sophisticated, but it was still just. But I mean, I wanted that game so bad, and I never got it. I didn't get to play a version of it until I was like in college or something. But
like looking around today, like there's so many dungeon crawlers for the computer game that I missed completely. Like computers, PC gaming.
There's and also like on your phone or whatever. There's it's a whole genre. You just type in roguelike. And it's like varying levels of sophistication. There are really simple ones, and I've played some of them. And the simpler ones I like more. And then there are kind of like more complicated ones with, ornate graphics and stuff.
I learned a new term called a blobber.
A blobber, okay.
It's where like, I think this is right, where if you have other people in your party, they all move around together with you, or like if somebody joins your party, they're like following you around.
Okay, so that would be like Final Fantasy or something, you're walking in a line and everybody just sort of tagging along.
Like Frodo, like and everybody. I had Golden Axe for Sega.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it is kind of like. Yeah, because I think it had branching pathways that you could sort of choose. Oh, there was like an official Dungeons and Dragons arcade game that was kind of like Golden Axe, but did have it had really insanely branching pathways and stuff.
I have the Beholder for SNES. I think my buddy had rented that one. Mm-hmm. We were messing around with that, and I had one of the Phantasy Star games.
I love Phantasy Star. I was kind of fascinated with Phantasy Star, and I remember seeing the commercials, and I wasn't sure exactly what the game was. Like, it seemed very cool, but it had scenes where it was like top-down action, but then it would have scenes like where you're inside like a 3D dungeon, and the monsters would attack. And on the Sega commercials, they'd show like the Sega phaser, or like their zapper, basically. And so I wasn't sure, like, oh, is it like a light gun game? Are you like going through the dungeon and then you like shoot at these monsters as they come up and stuff? I was kind of fascinated with Phantasy Star, and when I eventually played it, it didn't live up to like what I'd had in mind, but it was pretty cool for the time.
There was a character. He was like a dog. I called him Grits, but I think he's Grizz.
Oh, yeah, that little dog, like, he looks like Pikachu.
Yeah, he's got the ears and everything. Yeah. And I rented Shining Force.
Yeah.
We rented that from Farmore. And for the PC, I had Diablo and Diablo 2.
Right, yeah. So I never like when that stuff was big, I didn't have a PC. I had a Mac. And so I never got to play those, but they did always look pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, I played like the Ultima,
Oh yeah, I remember.
you know.
And they got to a point where it was like Ultima Online and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
it kind of got sophisticated and stuff. And the NES Ultima is a lot of fun. And
I've never
so
played
you'd have
that.
like the NES Ultima, and then you'd have Dragon Warrior and stuff. You know, there was one on the Mac, on the Macintosh, like the old black and white Macintosh, called Dungeons of Doom, and it was like shareware or whatever, and they had it at school. So like
Oh
at the end of the
wow.
day, when you could kind of do whatever, we'd go on and we'd just play it, and it was a lot of fun. You just sort of your pointer would turn into a sword, and you just like click it in whatever direction you wanted to go, and you'd fight monsters. That one,
That's super
like I'd
cool.
like to play that one again now. I don't know if somebody's made like an emulator of that or like a phone version of it.
I'm gonna look online. Dungeon of Doom.
Yeah.
King of Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
That's more like I still like it. You're going through like a castle and dungeons, even though it's kind of like a side scroller beat 'em up.
Yeah.
Like I just love the look and vibe of that.
Well, I was kind of fascinated with like the attempts at making a side scroll, RPG or a side scroll adventure game. It did always seem like they were always like top down.
Yeah.
Going back to like the Intellivision, the Dungeons and Dragons for the Intellivision, the Cloudy Mountain. It's like attempts to make it side scrolling was interesting to me. Like Simon's Quest was kind of like that.
Oh yeah, I forgot about Simon's
But then
Quest.
there was an arcade one called Kadash.
I don't know that. Wow.
And you could choose what kind of character you'd be in the arcade, stick your quarter in, you'd choose what kind of character you want to be, a wizard, a warrior, a ninja.
Oh,
There was a
cool.
ninja option. And then you'd walk through side scrolling through the town and talk to different people, maybe buy some stuff. And then you walk into the dungeon and climb it, and you're like fighting all this stuff. That one was a lot of fun. I recently got like an Evercade with that on it, and I just played it till I beat it with like the warrior, and then I started a new game as the ninja, and I'm gonna try like beating it as
That
the ninja.
sounds so good. I'm going all in and like going down a rabbit hole with this stuff.
Yeah, literally, because that's basically what they are. You do go into rabbit holes, and there was one for the NES called Faxanadu. I don't know if you ever played that.
No.
It was kind of like the Simon's Quest kind of thing, but it was like instead of going into a dungeon, you're going into a tree. You're like walking into this giant tree, and you're working your way up through all the. The other thing I was thinking about, sort of like the Jungian basis of the appeal of these dungeon crawls. I was thinking there's also sort of a corollary. There's like in sort of fantasy games or fantasy fiction or whatever, when you go into like the high towers of like the castle, and it's all white and glowing and luminous and stuff. And I was thinking the dungeon is kind of like the lower self, the sort of like animal self or whatever. But then when you're like up in those sort of high towers and stuff, that's like like mankind at its best. That's like, where it's like close to the gods, and you're in like, like in those sort of like white towers and stuff, like you wouldn't necessarily encounter like a muck covered orc or a troll or something. You'd be like encountering some kind of like wizard who's like contemplating the mysteries of the universe, and you get some kind of great like knowledge from them, or maybe you're fighting something, or you'd maybe meet a god or whatever. But again, it feels like that's like another part of like the psyche. I've always been fascinated with Dungeons and Dragons, and I also wondered if like maybe the appeal is just like sometimes these things are generational. So I was like little when Dungeons and Dragons was kind of like really exploding onto the scene. So I don't know, like maybe the appeal of it just got into me just because it was like I was the right age to be there when this big new fad was happening. Kind of the same thing with video games, because it was kind of around the same time, and like video games are so much in my soul, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, I was like a little kid when all this stuff was happening, or Star Wars or whatever. And but I was thinking, like, I was so fascinated with Dungeons and Dragons, but I think I've only like played it maybe twice in my life. Played like an actual like where you sit down with people and do Dungeons and Dragons. And the first time I played, like when I was little, we would kind of like fake a Dungeons and Dragons get like like my friend would have like some of the modules, and we'd read through, but like we didn't know what we were doing. We're just kind of goofing around with it. But maybe the first time I played it like for real, it was at a sleepover, and some of the kids I knew, some of them I didn't, And there was this like one kid I didn't know who was like the dungeon master. And some of these kids like had gotten together a bunch of times. So this was this ongoing campaign that I got to like participate in, you know, like it was already in progress, but I like took somebody else's character who wasn't there. Like I took over with their character. We're playing, and I was getting a little bit older. And so I feel like I was kind of doing something like I would never do now, but I was kind of sabotaging the game. I was kind of like goofing on it, you know, and I wasn't getting into the spirit. I was kind of like shitting on it, like as we're playing and stuff, which again, I wouldn't do that. And I realized like now thinking back, I realized why. It's like, I felt threatened by it because the kid who was the dungeon master, like this scenario that he came up with was so creative and so inventive and so imaginative. It was like they were, and again, it was part of like an ongoing campaign. And so they were in this like city in the clouds where it was like this floating, you know, fantasy city. And it was sort of patrolled by flying centaurs, like kind of like centaurs with wings and stuff. Like there's all this stuff. I'm like, how does he come up with this? And then he had given, like, one of the centaurs had given us these like red kerchiefs to wear to sort of let the other centaurs know that like we're okay, like not to bother us and stuff. Like it was all this great stuff. And I think I was just threatened. Like I was like, hey, I'm the imaginative, I'm the guy with the great imagination, I'm the creative guy. Who's this guy? Like I was kind of threatened because like his imagination was just so like amazing. So I feel like that was why I was trying to sabotage the game. Like I didn't want this guy and his like amazing ideas to like win out. You know what I mean?
First time I played, we were at summer camp.
Okay.
And we played outside, so it was in the trees.
You're getting into the spirit of things.
Yeah, like an orc could come out of the trees.
It's funny that like I played it at a sleepover, you played it at camp, because it's like these games, they do sprawl. Like when would somebody have time to play it except something like that where it's like, okay, this could literally go like as late as we want to stay up. That's how long this game is going to go. It's not like something you're doing for like a half hour after school or something.
And like my buddy and we would like in elementary school on the back of our like papers, we would draw like dungeon maps. Or
that's the thing. I was so involved in it without actually playing it, like almost at all. I'd do the same thing. I'd draw the maps, or if I'd maybe have like a copy of Dragon magazine or something, or maybe I'd have like a module or something. I'd be looking at the map. Like I'd be imagining what it would be like to play this game, but not actually playing it. Like, but it was sort of like, you know, video game versions like Zelda or something. That's when it was like, okay, cool, this I can do. There was the Indiana Jones role-playing game, which I would always see advertised in comic books and stuff as a kid, but I never had it. I never saw it, never, you know, just those ads. But I did in grade school come up with like my own version of it, where I would draw like a map of like an Indiana Jones kind of like temple or something. Wow. With all these puzzles. And then, you know, during lunch at school, I'd have people try to like play their way. And so I'd be like, okay, or, you know, you have to choose a mine cart to go down and one leads here, one, you know, and there's, you know, like, you know, you got to, you know, so that was kind of like my version of that, was these like Indiana Jones adventures I'd come up with.
We should do like a 1-page role-playing game.
Mm-hmm.
Like
that would be fun.
Like a one sheet,
yeah.
Like just like
I mean, because now that's what I'm looking for, is just sort of like a quick hit, just like something. So this Scoundrel is kind of like that. I think I might have told this story on here on the show, but you know, one time I was like babysitting my nephew, and it's like like what do you do? Like you got to keep this kid like occupied and entertained and stuff. So I came up with a like kind of like one of those Indiana Jones things. I came up with this sort of paper maze that was filled with robots and things that he had to fight and stuff. So I came up with this thing, and then we played it, and you know, he went through it, and I'm like, okay, you're in a corner, and there's this and there's this. What do you want to do? You know, he's zapping robots and stuff. He's having the time of his life. And then like we were done, and he's like, okay, let's do another one. And I was like completely exhausted. It took me like so long to figure this thing out in the first place, and then playing through it is kind of, and like it was like it kept him occupied for like as long as that took, and then he like needed, and I was like, okay, this is a tough job. You know, babysitting isn't easy. You got, you know, and I was like, dude, I don't know what to tell you. Like I got nothing left. You know, like I'm gonna go take a nap. You know, try to stay out of trouble. You know.
That'd be cool if there was like a book that opens up and like the dungeon like unfolds.
You know, there's kind of something like that. I bought it recently. It's a Lord of the Rings board game book where like you unfold it, and then each thing is like, okay, now you're leaving the Shire, and there's a bunch of things you have to accomplish, and then you turn the page, and then it's like, okay, now you're in the mines of Moria, and then you turn, so I played a little bit of it. Yeah, maybe I'll bring it over.
Yeah,
sometime
we should do
play it.
another game, some more gaming.
Yeah, I'd like that for sure. I always wanted like a cool Dungeons and Dragons movie, and there's been attempts that didn't quite do it. This newest one is pretty cool. I do like. I like kind of like the basic Dungeons and Dragons kind of setup. So then with movies, it's like when Dungeons and Dragons was huge, there were a bunch of attempts at stuff. Conan the Barbarian is kind of like a really good one. Legend with Tom Cruise. I like that one because that was like, oh yeah, this is like a dungeon, because they get their little party, they have to rescue somebody, they have to rescue a princess, they go underground, they solve puzzles, that was a good one. You get like the never-ending story, but there just weren't enough.
We need back to basics dungeon crawling in movies.
Yeah, like I like this new Dungeons and Dragons, but it did feel a little clever. Like I want them to just go into like this, this dank, but stone brick kind of underground kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like it's just a little too clever, a little too like I know fantasy is supposed to be imaginative and out there, but it's like I don't know. I kind of want like wanted to like at least give us one that's like the basics. Basically like Gauntlet, but with a story.
Yeah,
I had to talk about it, do some processing about.
I think about a dungeon crawl all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I just was looking at that new the D&D Lego.
I am tempted to get the Dungeons and Dragons Lego. Like I kind of have a lifetime supply of Legos, so the last thing I need is a new one. But that one is pretty cool.
I was turning it around. I'm like, oh my god,
it's got a lot of cool stuff.
It's like back to basics dungeon crawl right there.
I'm waiting for them to come up with like some Zelda stuff like that, because they do have a Zelda Lego set where it's like the Deku tree, but again, like that's not really my era of Zelda. Like I didn't really get into that kind of those the ones for N64. Yeah, I never got into like the N64 game. Like I was kind of wasn't playing video games as much when that came around. So so the Deku tree doesn't speak to me. Like if they came out with a Zelda set where it's like, the level 1 dungeon or something with like that little dragon at the end or something,
Yeah,
that would speak to me.
64, Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, exactly. Like that stuff, it just, like the Deku tree is from that stuff, and it's like I know it, I have played it, but it doesn't hit that like nostalgic spot the way like the Legend of Zelda 1.
We've been looking at the Legend of Zelda Legos, and there's like a set waiting in the wings that they like put the clamp down on. It was supposed to be like full like Zelda's castle. Like,
yeah, I saw that one on the site, and that's what I'm waiting for. And the D&D set is kind of like that. It is this like tower.
Yeah,
it's got all these little rooms and traps and interesting things. And that Zelda, like that's what I'm waiting for too. That Zelda one looked so cool. Where it has like puzzles and little sliding secret doors.
I think in the D&D one, there's a tavern, and you can get into the dungeon like through the tavern, like a trap door.
I might have to treat myself and get that.
It's hitting. It checks all the boxes.
Get that Dungeons and Dragons one. I do like. I kind of Dungeons and Dragons itself, like they're so proprietary, and some of the stuff that they do is kind of eternal, like it's kind of corny or whatever. But
at a Barnes and Noble,
that's where I keep seeing it.
They started like not keeping the real Legos out.
Yeah,
they just have like an empty like display box.
Oh, okay.
So I can like pick it up and like hold it in front of me, like looking at it for longer.
You know what's the other thing that interested me? Like Dungeons and Dragons, I like just the name Dungeons and Dragons. I figured you'd be fighting dragons a lot more often. Like, it's like you get to the end of your dungeon and then you fight a dragon. Maybe you fight 2 dragons. But it's like, I feel like you could play Dungeons and Dragons for years and years without ever encountering a dragon. Like, one of those boxed games, the one that I do like, those ones I do like, and there's Wrath of Ashardalon. And it is, like, I've played a bunch of, a bunch of sessions of that, and so I have gotten to fight. The dragon, a Chardalon, is like the centerpiece of it, and I have gotten to fight a Chardalon a couple times. So it was like, okay, finally, after all these decades, I finally got to play a game of Dungeons and Dragons with like an actual fucking dragon in it. In the movie, they have this dragon, and it's again, it's a little too clever. It's kind of like a baby dragon that's like half alligator, half it's like, just give me like a straight up like Smaug or something.
You know what movie is it has like the look of classic D&D and the vibe? Dragonheart.
Okay.
With Dennis Quaid and Sean Connery.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen that one. Sean Connery.
I thought you were going to say Dragon Slayer with Peter McNichol.
Sean Connery's the voice of Draco the Dragon.
Okay. Draco the Dragon. I wanted to play like a Dungeons and Dragons type game on the Atari so bad, and so by the time Dark Chambers came around, I'd already moved on to NES, so it was kind of like too little, too late. But Intellivision had 2 Dungeons and Dragons games. Atari had none. And then I recently found out that they were working on a Dungeons and Dragons 3 for the Intellivision, and then simultaneously a version of it for the Atari 2600. So it was going to be the first Atari 2600 like official Dungeons and Dragons game, but it just never happened. Like there's like a prototype, a functional prototype that I think is like almost complete. But that looked pretty cool. There was Adventure, which I did love. Like, I loved Adventure for the Atari. It kind of, it did what it needed to do. And then there was Sword Quest, the Sword Quest series, Sword Quest Earthworld, Sword Quest Fireworld, Sword Quest Waterworld, that, like, didn't, it promised a lot, delivered a little.
We have our work cut out for it.
Yeah.